been getting a lot of requests, mostly to cut my hair. So yes, I've had a haircut. Now, in my last video, I did the wking D8. Goes louder than the Extreme 2, even when the Extreme 2 is on plug-in power. Bit of a bargain if you're after a boombox. Now the question is, if the wking D8 had a baby, what would it look like? A bit like that. This is in fact the wking D8 Mini. Is it as big a bargain as the wking D8 Daddy? Is it another boombox? What is it all about? Well, I'll give you some of the specs. It's a 30 watt rated speaker. I'm saying 30 watts. I did see somewhere it's 30 watts peak and 20 watts rated. However, in the manual that comes in the box, it says it's 30 watts. It also says it goes up to 160 kilohertz. I kid you not. I'm assuming they meant 16,000 hertz. But is it another game changer? We're talking 40 quid. Now, I am going to compare it to the JBL Charge 4 and the Tribit Maxsound Plus. That looks a bit of a mismatch. Why am I doing that? Well, I'm doing the JBL Charge 4 because it's a £120 speaker versus a £50 speaker, but they're about the same size and rated around 30 watts each. 30 watts or 20 watts. At the end of the day, how loud does it go? It doesn't really matter what it says on paper. So they're saying 30 watts mostly. I'm comparing it to the JBL Charge 4 because of the size and because it's half the price. I'm also comparing it to the Tribit Maxsound Plus. Why? Well, because that's a £40 speaker, that's a £40 speaker. So what can you do with 40 quid? I know it looks like a mismatch because of the size, but for me, it's about as good as you're going to get for a kind of hi-fi-ish sound for 40 quid. It's very well balanced. It's a very neutral sounding speaker. Of course, it's not a boombox, is it? But it's a very clear, nice speaker, about the best that I've heard personally for a little, small speaker, and for around 40 quid. So I think that's a decent comparison. What you can do with 40 quid or what you can do for the size. Yes, mate, but we want to hear the Anchor Soundcore Motion Plus. I know, you want to hear the Anchor. I've got to say though, the Motion Plus is like a 90-ish pound speaker that sounds like a 150 pound speaker. This is a £40 speaker. So I don't think it's a great comparison. However, I will do that in my next video. Just to say, given how big a bargain the Motion Plus is, it's a bit much to say, oh, there's a £40 speaker that's going to sound as good as the Motion Plus, which means the £40 speaker is up there with £150 speakers. Well, yeah, maybe it is, but I don't think, in my first comparison, it's a fair comparison. Will be my next video. So, what's it got in common? Apart from the fact that it's easy to remove the grill and it's easy to take off the sides. I will do that in another video. I'm going to test it in default mode. So the headline specs, as I said, 30 watts they're claiming, mostly. I did see, as I said, that that's actually a peak rating. 30 watts on paper for the output. £40 retail, 120, 40 quid Maxsound Plus. It's a 5,000 milliamp hour battery on maximum volume, which personally I think is the only real world test. I'm getting 4 hours out of it. Not bad on maximum volume, and you're unlikely to play it all the time on maximum volume. So that's pretty decent battery life. Like the other two, and like most of the speakers at this level, it's a basic SBC Bluetooth codec. It is sporting Bluetooth 5, whereas the other two speakers are both Bluetooth 4.2. So that's a plus for the D8 Mini. It does support true wireless stereo pairing, as does the JBL Charge 4, but for stereo, each and every time you have to go into the app when you want stereo with two JBL Charge 4s. There is no stereo pairing with the Maxsound Plus or party mode. I did say in one video you can do party mode. There is no pairing at all with another Maxsound Plus or any other speaker at all. Handily, you've got a USB-C connection, as you do with the JBL Charge 4, but it's still micro USB for charging on the Maxsound Plus. Maxsound Plus is rated at 24 watts. These are rated at 30 watts, as I'm saying. Charges at 5 volts, 2 amps, which is a little bit behind the Charge 4 and the Maxsound Plus, which are 2.3 and 2.5 amps, I believe. Now, it is 1.2 kilos. It is heavier than both of these speakers. It was obviously heavier than that one, which is only 500 grams, and this is just under a kilo. So, is that noticeable in the hand? Not really. Not really. They're both pretty similar to me. In terms of, obviously, build quality, yes, it's all plastic. It's not the greatest build quality, but really all that matters is how it sounds. But if you're thinking, oh, it's a bit plasticky and I'm going to be throwing it about, look, if you're throwing it about, JBL Charge 4 is your man, isn't it? You know, it's like a proper rugged covering on that, where this is going to crack. I assume, I haven't chucked it about because I assume it's going to crack. They all do have auxiliary inputs, and you can use all of them as a power bank, except you can't use the Maxsound Plus as a power bank. The wking D8 Mini is the only one to support NFC. So you've got your little NFC there. None of them have tweeters, but of course, you know, as you want in a Bluetooth speaker, they all have 2 full range drivers for stereo pairing. Oh, hang on a sec. JBL don't believe in stereo anymore. You've got one nicely centered. Oh no, you haven't. You've got one driver, oval shape, well, racetrack they call it, on the right hand side. But you do get stereo, the old fashioned stereo, in the other 2 speakers. You've also got passive radiators either side, both of the Charge 4 and the D8. And you have 2 passive radiators front and back on the little Maxsound Plus. I haven't tested the battery life personally on the Charge 4 at this point, so I'm not going to quote what I think or assume or what other people are saying, because I only go by my own maximum loudness tests. However, maximum loudness on the same test, same track, on repeat, 3 hours for the Maxsound Plus. So, what else has it got in common with its daddy, the wking D8? Well, it has an EQ mode. And by the way, it doesn't have an app. Like, well, the Maxsound Plus doesn't have an app either, but the JBL Charge 4 has an app, but it's a bit of a nightmare to use a lot of the time. Whereas on the wking, you have a dedicated button for your EQ mode. A little bit awkward on this one, you have a play pause button for your music in the middle there. And to get into EQ mode is a matter of double clicking that. However, you may have guessed already, but mate, if I'm playing music and I hit the play pause button, isn't that going to play pause the music? Yes, half the time double clicking that to get to EQ mode just controls the music. But if you get the double click just right, then it will switch to EQ mode, which personally I found that a little bit infuriating. I'm going to be honest, it kept pausing. I just wanted to switch EQ mode, so I found that a bit weird. But you got your basic on-off button, and you got your volumes up and down, and on the back is your power bank facility, your charging facility, your auxiliary. There's also a slot for a micro SD card. So yeah, you can play off of the micro SD. I haven't tried that, to be honest, but I'm assuming that's what else would it be for? One thing it has that is a little bit better than the wking Daddy, which is IPX5. This is IPX6, which means it will take a sustained jet of water, whereas the other one just takes splashes. Of course, you can actually submerge the Charge 4, and indeed, you can submerge the Maxsound Plus. So, I mentioned it's got EQ modes. So, let's have a look at what the difference is between the 2 EQ modes. So, I'm saying 2 EQ modes, I mean default mode and EQ mode. And of course, I'll look at the whole frequency response, right up the volume curve. So 33% volume. Default mode is bass heavy, and EQ mode is equally slanted to the high end. It's very bright. Personally, I would like something in between the 2. I'm saying bass heavy. It's really all about the upper bass, around 150 hertz, really big boost, and then falling away. So no real lower bass compared to the upper bass. Reasonably flat, but the problem is you have this massive dip, 150 hertz to 2000 hertz, then it falls away again, and you have this massive dip, 9500 hertz. So big holes in the sound. Although technically, you know, for a speaker in this price, plus or minus about 4.5 decibels. So outside the normal plus or minus 3 decibel range, 66%, that bass suddenly becomes a lot less prominent, but you do have this big upper bass boost, but compared to the high end, it's much flatter now, albeit with the dips in between. At 66% you can measure plus or minus about 3.5 to 4 decibels, which isn't too bad, and that would give you about 85 hertz to 20 kilohertz. But you do have these massive dips, 150 hertz to 2000, and that big dip at 9,500. And that EQ mode is now overly bright, as even the upper bass falls away relative to the rest of the frequency range. Maximum volume. There isn't that much difference between EQ mode and default mode, albeit EQ mode remains brighter. Looking at how that scales, volume scales pretty linear, although it's weighted to the bottom end. It's notable that bass is never actually limited, it just reduces relative to the rest of the frequency range as you go up the volume scale. It's around about 60% where the bass flattens out relative to that high end. It is very bass heavy in default mode at the lower volumes, and default mode versus EQ mode, it's the same story, just a bit brighter. The dips in the same place, big dip 250 hertz, mids pretty much missing, and then a big dip again 9,500 hertz. The takeaway is it's clearly tuned for the upper bass to mask the missing lower bass. Does that quite well actually. So on paper, at the lower volumes, certainly looking very bass heavy or very bright, and as you go up, use an EQ mode even brighter, but kind of balanced with a few peaks and dips for the rest of the frequency response. I knew one way to know how it really sounds. Let's have a listen. So my test at 33%. Well, I'm saying 33%. As you know, or may not know, I like to volume match them before I actually start recording, and then decide if I'm going to normalize them in post, but get them as closely matched in terms of volume as possible beforehand. That means I'm playing this with the wking D8 Mini at 33% and these two at 40%. Yes, at those volume levels, the wking D8 Mini does play louder. So 33% test.
Charming to me, I just need this to be real. I don't need no fairy tale. You don't need a killer dragon for me. Ooh, I don't need no fairy still every time. Whatever it is, I keep on trying. 'Cause it ain't hard to forgive when you know what it's like. That's why I'm better with than without you. Oh, I'm on it, I want it, but why do you seem to call it your own? Everybody gives you advice, yeah, on how to live your life, how to live your life. Don't you know that life is full of surprises? You better realize, nobody knows what's in your soul and how your heart works. Nobody knows, nobody cares. It's time for you to live your life, yeah. You can do it right now. Oh, you can do it right now.
So this is what it looks like. Volume match 33 to 40%. I needed to play the Charge 4 and the Maxsound Plus at 40% to get them nearer the same volume overall levels. And the winner for me at this sort of listening level is a Maxsound Plus. Why? Because it's by far the most balanced. In terms of absolute bass, yes, the Charge 4 goes noticeably deeper than the Mini D8 in both modes and the Maxsound Plus. We're getting down to about 60 Hz at levels you can still hear, whereas you're talking about 70 Hz, the Mini D8 and the Maxsound Plus. But if you put the Mini D8 into EQ mode, you're losing a dollop of bass and you get an overly bright sound. So between the Mini in EQ mode and in default mode, you're either overly bass heavy, which you may well like, or you're overly bright. But that adds up to a lot of clarity. Again, at lower volumes, it may be something you're after. However, you've got dips and peaks all over the place. Between 150 and 2000 Hertz, it's like a black hole. It's a massive dip. Then you've got another big dip, about 9,500 Hertz, and a big peak, around 13,000 Hertz. It's anything but flat. The Maxsound Plus, which is the light green line, you still get a dollop of bass. And it's noticeable, by the way, the Mini is tuned with big upper bass. So you're talking around 50, 160 Hertz. What you are hearing is a lot of upper bass, but not the deep bass. And the Charge 4, big roll off from 2,500 Hertz. So you're losing that clarity at the high end. And that's where the Maxsound Plus wins, because it retains its clarity at the high end. The Charge 4, yes, it's deeper. The mids are the best, but it doesn't have the high end clarity. If mids and bass is your main concern at these listening levels, the Charge 4 is the winner. So I've got to remember, it's a £40 speaker. This is not a £10,000 hi-fi. We've got to judge it in that manner. So it's not bad at 33% for a £40 speaker. At 33%, it's, for me, it's either too bass heavy or it's too bright. I would have liked something in the middle. And talking about something in the middle, yes, it's going to be the Maxsound Plus. I do prefer the Maxsound Plus. You're still getting a little bit of bass, getting a lot of clarity. It's much flatter response. There are lots of dips and peaks. And the thing is, it's tuned with a big old 160 Hertz peak, which, although the lower bass is there, it's being overwhelmed by that upper bass peak. And as I said, really something in between the two modes would have probably been the best of the bunch then. The JBL Charge 4 is all about the lower bass, the deeper bass. The highs roll off very steeply. So if you want clarity over bass, well, it's one of the other two, I would imagine. If you put that into EQ mode, otherwise the Maxsound Plus. But it's not bad either, the Charge 4. It's the only one, to me, that has that rumble type bass. It's a proper deeper bass, where others are more of a slap round the face kind of bass. If that makes any sense to you, it makes sense to me. It's not a deep bass, I'm trying to say, but it's there. So real world volumes, I think for most people, 66%. And I am playing them all at 66%. And I'm normalizing in post to get them the same volume levels.
I'm on my own, broken alone. I feel the rain crashing down all around this empty town. I'm searching for the lost and found, but you don't care, you're unaware. Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare. Just stare, 'cause the flames will burn us. I thought you were the one for me. That's why I gave you everything. Held you close by the stormy seas. Oh, you meant the world to me. I used to kiss your head when you cried for me. Hold your hand while the pain was over. Keep you warm by the roaring sea. You meant the world to me.
66%, the Mini D8 holds up much better. In fact, although the Charge 4 has a bigger bass, 74 Hz, minus 23, minus 27, 4 decibels higher in the bass peak than the Mini D8. The Mini D8's low bass holds up pretty well, 50 Hz, minus 40. Charge 4, 2 decibels quieter, 50 Hz. And it has a big upper bass, minus 23, minus 27. It's 4 decibels louder in the upper bass. So clever use of the upper bass. It's now much flatter, although it still has that huge dip around 10,000 Hz. But now it sits between the Maxsound with its clarity, but it doesn't have the bass. And the Charge 4 that has the bass, but not much clarity at these volumes. The Maxsound Plus sounds obviously thin, but it is a lot smaller. It really doesn't hold up in the low bass, but it does have its upper bass peak, 150 Hz, minus 30. So it's only 3 decibels down in terms of upper bass on the Charge 4, but it has a lot more clarity. You can see there the rest of the frequency range is much stronger in the mids, and it extends further into the very high end, the ambience end, you could say. The D8 also rolls off very heavy after its peak around 15,000 Hz. Of course, this is the ambience range, the harmonics range. Unlikely to hear it, but it is part of the overall sound. So these sort of volume levels, right, the Maxsound Plus, which I do love, against the other two, it is sounding a little bass light, but it is very clear. Now I think the D8 comes into its own. It comes into its own at default mode. The higher the volume, the less that EQ mode makes sense. I know it's going to go louder, you know, if you keep to a brighter sound and reduce the bass, but that only really matters surely at maximum volume. Otherwise, it's just too bright. You know, maybe if you only want clarity and, you know, you listen to podcasts or stuff like that, don't need the bass, then it makes sense, I guess. But for me, if, you know, listening to music, it's default mode is the one at 66%. And then, yes, I think it probably is, out of these three, the winner. So you do get a bit of clarity with a bit of bass. The Charge 4 is always going to win on quality of bass. It goes deeper. It's the rumbly type of bass. It's not as flat as a Maxsound Plus. It's an enjoyable listen. For a £40 speaker, it's an enjoyable listen. Don't get me wrong. I'm just, you know, judging it by all the other speakers that I and probably most of you have heard. So, you know, this is not groundbreaking stuff, but this is, you know, one of the best I would imagine you're going to get at 40 quid for a decent, upfront, you know, reasonably powerful sound. Talking of powerful sounds, then what about maximum volume? How loud does it go? So the Mini D8 default mode, EQ mode. These volumes, maximum volume, there's not much in it in terms of bass. Bass peak 81 Hz, minus 23, minus 24. Only 1 decibel down when in EQ mode in terms of bass peak. It's actually a bigger difference in the upper bass kick, around 160 Hz. There's actually 2 decibel difference between the default and EQ mode now. Obviously, EQ mode is about being brighter and a bit louder because of that. And so you can see that high end is flipping from around 1600 Hz. But whatever happens, you've got this big dip around the 10,000 Hz mark. Compared to the other two speakers, in absolute terms, and when I say that, I mean average across the whole frequency range, minus 21.4 in default mode, a bit louder, minus 20.9 in EQ mode. It goes louder than the Charge 4, both modes, louder obviously than the little Maxsound Plus, but the little Maxsound Plus is really kicking for its size. Minus 21.9 overall. It doesn't have the bass, but it has much bigger mids. Certainly than the Charge 4, and indeed than the Mini D8. So it can't match the bass of the others, but it certainly matches in terms of loudness. Absolute peaks, so instantaneous loudness at any one moment right across the track. Because of those mids, you've actually got a bigger peak on the Maxsound Plus. Was a shock to me. 101.1 decibels. EQ mode was 99.6, Mini D8 99.1, half a decibel louder for the D8, but both of them a couple of decibels behind, or 1.5 decibels behind that little Maxsound Plus. So where does the Charge 4 win? Well, obviously it's got the best quality bass, but it becomes muffled because there's a big roll-off. So it's got the best quality bass, no matter how you measure it. I must say, all the others have an upper bass kick, around 160 Hz, minus 29, minus 31. The Charge 4, 3 decibels down, minus 34. And the Maxsound Plus, although it's down, does have a little bit of upper bass kick. And it tries hard in the bass, but that bass peak is only minus 27. So it's like 3 or 4 decibels down on the others. In terms of lower bass, so 64 Hz is actually the bass peak on the Charge 4, minus 27. It's 5 decibels louder, and it's in lower bass than both the modes on the D8 and Maxsound Plus, bringing up the rear. So you don't get, the Maxsound Plus doesn't go deep. Obviously it's a tiny little speaker. It's amazing for its size. And it's amazing that it can still beat these in terms of absolute peaks because it's tuned higher up the frequency range. So I prefer the average across the whole track to say which speaker is louder. On that basis, it's the Mini D8 in EQ mode, but you're losing out on bass. So ultimately, remember this JBL Charge 4 with its mono driver, £120. This is a £40 speaker. It does go louder than the JBL Charge 4. The JBL Charge 4, even though it doesn't go as loud as the D8 Mini, it still wins in terms of if you still want some lower bass. So you've got lower bass, but it's still more about the upper bass on the wking D8, even at maximum volume. But it's that roll off on the Charge 4. If you want any sort of clarity, you know, it's a disappointment, the Charge 4. It's all about the bass. It's tuned for the bass, and it does have the best quality in terms of bass. And you know, it does have a better form factor. It is more rugged. It does come with an app that you can use. It is prettier to look at. You don't have to get pink as I did. And why did I get pink? It's because it was £20 cheaper, I think, or £30 cheaper at the time. I have got a black one as well, just in case you wondered. So I kind of think if I had to have one speaker between any of these three, it would be a hard decision. I don't think I would push myself to pay £120 over 40 quid because I can get a second Mini, have two of them for 80 quid, and it still save myself 40 quid on a Charge 4. And I'm going to get a little bit more bass slam with that as well. So I would say, should I get the Charge 4 or a Mini? I would say it's a Charge 4 or 2 Minis. Then it makes far more sense. But the little Maxsound Plus, it goes nearly as loud as the others. Well, technically it goes louder than the Charge 4, but without the bass, of course. But for me, still a more relaxing listen. It's more detailed of a listen, and it's the size. It's what you're getting for the size. It's the same money. It's not the powerful sound of the D8, but it sounds more right than the D8. So if I had to deliver one of these two, I would still go for the Maxsound Plus, simply because, you know, when it comes to a slightly more serious listen, I can hear more of the details of the music. It's a slightly more analytical listen, whereas this is just a bit of a fun speaker, which may be all you want. If you're just gonna, you know, party around, then the wking Mini makes more sense. The point is, speakers we're getting now at these price points is fantastic. You know, you can get a decent old speaker and options, small or big or whatever, 50 quid, not much more for the 50 watt wking D8 Daddy. So I think it's, you know, it is a win, but it's know what you're getting. At low volumes, it's either too bass heavy or too bright. And again, I think the Maxsound Plus would win out. But if you like a nice bass, the Charge 4. But as I said, I'm sure what you really want to know is, how does it compare to Motion Plus? So that's going to be my next video. So hope you got something out of this video, and thank you for watching.
UK